Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Supplier Reliability webinar. We're thrilled to have you join us today as we dive into the latest and greatest updates to the supplier management and our introduction of the supplier risks. Today's session is all about showcasing the new features and enhancements that we've developed to make your supplier management experience more strategic, effective, and impactful. Before we begin, there are a number of tools on your screen, and I'd like you to take a moment to locate your Q&A box. We'll be responding to your questions throughout the webinar and discussing those questions at the end. Should you be watching this later on demand, please continue to submit your questions via that Q&A tool, and our team will receive those and respond to you directly via email. So for today's webinar, there's a number of things that we plan to cover, and I'm here with our product manager, Machon, and our senior director of data science, Coleman Newell. And our overarching goal today is to answer these 4 questions on your screen with a deep dive into the new features and how they work, plan to share some examples, feedback, and best practices for using these updates. And we want to conclude with a question and answer session where you get to ask those questions and hear directly from our experts. So let's get started with Coleman on our answering that first question: why supplier risk management?
Thanks, Lisa. So before we jump into our product and show you how a lot of these new features and tools work, we want to give you a little bit of context as to why we're orienting Supplier Hub and our product around risk management itself. The short answer is that we know that there are some key drivers of good outcomes and bad outcomes in your business that are driven by supplier collaboration. Supplier engagement, we've seen consistently, is the primary driver of on-time delivery, and that takes a number of different forms. We want to make sure that suppliers are acknowledging purchase orders, that the purchase orders are sent successfully to them, and that they're acknowledging and engaging them on them in a timely manner. All of these we've seen have material impacts on on-time delivery. The biggest of those is that when a purchase order is acknowledged in SourceDay, it's 40% more likely to be delivered on time. That's the biggest driver of on-time delivery that we can measure in our platform. Secondly, even just making sure that the purchase order is successfully delivered to the supplier matters to on-time delivery. So any barrier to being able to successfully deliver a purchase order also decreases on-time delivery. When a purchase order is successfully delivered, it's about 20% more likely to be delivered on time. And then timeliness matters too. Every day a purchase order is not acknowledged increases its likelihood of being late by another 2%. And although these issues are fairly rare, a good chunk of purchase orders fail to be delivered successfully because of an issue with the actual contact itself. So even if you think that the process is running behind the scenes automatically, we've seen that about 2% of our emails to suppliers receive a hard bounce, either because the supplier is out of office or maybe they're no longer with that company anymore, and you have an unknown purchase order floating out there. All of these are really big drivers of outcomes for your business. We want to orient our supplier management tools so that you can help kind of increase the likelihood of those good outcomes.
What we wanted to do with this release is provide a single place to be able to manage all things suppliers. So previously in our application, we had a few different places that you could go to view contact information for suppliers, details for that supplier, volume and purchase order lines that you've collaborated on with that supplier, and scorecard and overall performance grading. What we wanted to do here is bring all of those disparate areas into a single home for all things supplier, which we're calling the Supplier Hub page, and that is what you're going to be seeing on this screen. It's one single place where you can view all of your suppliers that we have in SourceDay. You can filter on just ones that are in SourceDay, just ones that have risks on them, and be able to view the details in the settings for each of those suppliers. The first phase of this feature launched this month. So it went out on December 4th. And we have phase 2 coming soon in January. We're going to be making even more updates to this Supplier Hub page. And additionally, on this page, what we wanted to do is provide more context for users around who their suppliers are and which suppliers actually matter. So one thing that we heard when we were betaing these features with some of our customers that had early access is the need to be able to understand which suppliers actually matter to my business. I want to contextualize of my supplier base, which ones do I need to manage more proactively, which ones do I need to be looking into, and which ones have potentially had a low performance over a period of time. So one quick improvement that you'll be able to see on the supplier page is a few different columns here that show the volume for each of your suppliers. So we can see that in the completed lines and the supplier's overall score and letter grade. So what we're showing here is over the past 90 days, how has that supplier been performing and what is that supplier's volume? So this allows you as the buyer to be able to go in and at a glance, be able to understand who these suppliers are, which ones am I actively working with, and how they've been performing for me. And then additionally on this page, you'll be able to see a new column called risks. And in that column, we have these risk pills that pop up whenever we believe that a supplier has a risk to you in your on-time delivery for your business. So we're going to walk through a few of those different risk types and talk about what they mean. And as you can maybe start to imply here, these are the same risks that we're seeing from the PO dashboard. So what we're doing is we're taking that same pattern of flagging areas where we think, hey, you need to focus, and putting that on suppliers as well. So just like a purchase order can be at risk, we believe a supplier can have risk associated with it as well, and requires you or somebody on your team to actually go into the application and take some sort of action to make sure that your procurement business is running smoothly. So this first risk is called new email detected. One thing we kept hearing from our customer base is that the vendor table in their ERP or contact information in their ERP is shared by many different parties. So whether that's procurement and sales and accounting and whoever it may be in your business, what we kept hearing is that emails are changing for suppliers, new contacts are added, old contacts are removed, and the buyer who might be managing purchase orders for one of those suppliers might not have any insight into that contact being changed out. So what would happen is that all of a sudden POs are not being delivered to a specific supplier because of a contact change that the buyer had no visibility into. So one of the first things that SourceDay wanted to do is to provide better visibility for buyers to be able to manage when those contacts are changing in the ERP. So what this risk is saying is that if SourceDay detects that there is a new primary email address that is being detected from the ERP and that it does not match any existing supplier users in SourceDay, we'll go ahead and we'll flag this as a risk in SourceDay and allow you to add new contact information or ignore the risk. This second risk is called email issue. And this is the same thing that you guys are able to see on your PO dashboard. So when a PO fails to deliver to a supplier, for example, they had a bad email address, we're flagging that on the PO in the dashboard. We're going to now be doing the same thing on the supplier hub page. So anytime that we see a email address that we had a failed PO delivery to, so we tried to send an email and it could not send for some sort of reason, potentially the supplier has blacklisted that email address, or that email address does not exist, potentially there's a typo, we're going to go ahead and flag that in your supplier hub page and allow you to manage users, i.e. invite new contacts, remove old contacts, whatever you need to do. So that manage users button right there that the risk is prompting you to go to will allow you to manage who are the actual email addresses associated with each of my individual suppliers. And lastly, we've got a third risk that we'll be showing on this Supplier Hub page, and this is for uninvited supplier. So what this means here is we're able to actually flag when a new purchase order is cut and goes into SourceDay, but it's associated with a supplier that has not been invited to the SourceDay platform. So in this case, that supplier is actually not receiving emails from SourceDay because they have not been invited to the platform. And in order to resolve that risk, you can invite that supplier onto SourceDay. So we want to make sure we highlight the actual risk involved. So what we go ahead and we do is we quantify the extended cost of that purchase order to show you that you have a potential PO worth, let's see, in this case, $104,000 that is not on SourceDay. So we're prompting you to be able to bring that supplier onto SourceDay so they can be able to get the benefit of collaboration and the automation that we're providing from our system. All right, so now we're going to show how we get over from this Supplier Hub page, which should be available in your UI. So if you log into SourceDay platform you should be able to go at the top of the nav bar and be able to go to the suppliers page. And as we can see here, by clicking on the View Details button, we can navigate over to the details for that individual supplier, where we're able to see the users associated with that supplier, the settings for that specific supplier, and then all the way on the left, that little tab there, we can jump over and view that supplier's individual scorecard. And I'm going to pass it back off to Coleman to talk a little bit about our new scorecard and updated feature.
Thanks, Connor. So one big component of this new Supplier Hub and Supplier Risk Management product is an updated and completely overhauled scorecard for all of your suppliers. It has a few key advantages over our previous versions of the Supplier Scorecard. One is that it's better configured to your business. It's easier and more richly configurable. A second is that it has richer measures of supplier performance. So we have more context, more details, more ways to slice and dice the metrics that really matter to you to evaluate your suppliers against. That includes on-time delivery, responsiveness, and price variance. And then lastly, we want to have more context for where the supplier's performance sits. How can we compare this to a relevant benchmark? So we've added peer benchmarking with more explanatory visualizations. So SourceDay is going to compare the selected supplier against all of your other suppliers that are invited to SourceDay so that you can see where they stand according to the rest of your supplier base. So I'm going to walk through all of those components in a little bit more detail now. You'll see that there's it carries over a lot of the functionality from our previous scorecards. If you're familiar with those, you can see there's still an overall grade that's determined by on-time delivery, responsiveness, and price variance. We continue to see that those are the critical metrics that matter to our customer base on evaluating their suppliers. What you'll see that is new, if we progress to the next slide, is that we want to give more details and more configurability into those metrics themselves. So you can see that underneath each hero metric of on-time percentage, responsiveness, price variance, we have more components that make that up. So not just what is the on-time percentage, but what's the average number of days late? What are the how often is my supplier moving out the due date? And so on and so forth for responsiveness and price variance as well. So more contextual data to help you understand that top level metric, and also more configurability. So you can see at the top here, there is a toggle that lets you choose which date you want to evaluate your supplier based on. Right now we have this set to a due date, which you're collaborating with this supplier on. So if they update the target due date for a purchase order, it will update that due date. That means we're evaluating on-time delivery against the latest version of that due date. I can also toggle over and view on-time delivery based on the original promise date that doesn't change as we continue to collaborate on the purchase orders. So you can see on-time delivery in a number of different ways, and you can, of course, filter to different date ranges as well. One quick note here is that responsiveness has been changed a little bit from for our previous scorecard users, from just being built on the response time, the number of days and hours it takes for a supplier to respond, to now being based on response rate and also including that response time underneath. The reason for this is that we would often see response times that were pretty low and effective, but then there were a good chunk of purchase order updates that were not being responded to at all, which wasn't reflected in that response time metric. So now we want to give you the full picture by showing both response rate and response time for each supplier. And then the other key advantage we mentioned was just more contextual analytics, richer detail. So on-time delivery is more than just a percentage. You can break this down in a number of different ways, and we give you a few contextual charts to do that. We've heard in our beta period with this product, well, before its general release, that this is one of the kind of really heavily valued features, that you just get a better understanding of on-time delivery. We can see what drives it, what are the different ways to slice and dice it, a little bit richer context. So we have first a chart that allows you to compare on-time delivery to the supplier's peers. How does this supplier compare to my overall supplier network? How that on-time delivery trends over time. Are there any periods of underperformance, dips, general improvements, that sort of thing? And then a really important one is how far off the due date are the misses. So on-time percentages tells you whether it's on time or not. It doesn't tell you how far off those late or early orders are. So we want to see the distribution of how often is a purchase order late by a certain amount. We'll give you a good bit of detail on that, and also allow you to benchmark the how late are my late orders against your overall supplier base as well. And then lastly, one that we hear all the time is that I'm worried that my on-time delivery is missing the fact that our suppliers are moving out the due dates quite frequently. Now we can help you measure that in the same space. So you can see how often a due date was moved out on a purchase order, how many times that due date was moved out, and for how many days for each of the purchase orders under this supplier.
Yep.
All right. And lastly, I'll pass it back over to Connor. I mentioned the other key advantage is more configurability built into the scorecard. Part of that is making those settings easier to understand and easier to change. Connor's going to walk you through how we do that.
Thank you. And really quick, just to zoom in on the overall supplier network. When we're talking about comparing suppliers against each other, what we're looking at is for that specific supplier, how are they comparing against the other suppliers that are on SourceDay? So all of a sudden you have the ability to compare side by side my SourceDay suppliers against each other. So how is this specific supplier comparing against the other suppliers on SourceDay? So from the scorecard page, which if you're following along, you should be on. If you go ahead and you click on that top right button to view scorecard settings, the one that's highlighted in red here, we're going to jump over to the settings page where your company can configure scorecard settings for all of your suppliers. All right. So one of the big key things that we kept hearing for our old scorecard is the lack of configuration and the need for more clarity on what individual settings mean and how things are calculated. So one of the big overhauls that we did as part of this feature and rollout was to clean up the supplier scorecard settings page and allow for more configuration of individual settings. So you're going to see a completely brand new page. It's got more colors, it's a little brighter, and it looks a little bit easier to understand than the previous page. And we do a great job of just walking through what each setting means and what it does. So in the next slide, we're going to go ahead and jump into what those individual settings are. So the very first thing I'll call out is on the top right side of the page, where we're actually able to view for on-time performance, what makes up on-time performance. So the first configuration is allowing your customer, your company, to choose if you would like to penalize your suppliers for early deliveries or not. One of the use cases that we hear a lot is, hey, I do not want my suppliers to be penalized for early deliveries. That is well okay with me. So you as a customer have the ability to turn that on or off, to choose if you would like to penalize your suppliers or not. The next configuration that we have is choosing if your company wishes to penalize your suppliers on weekends. So when we're talking about on-time delivery, do we want to include or exclude weekends from that grading? And that is a drop-down that we have right below that, where we can exclude all weekends or exclude specific days. So I could exclude just Sunday or just Saturday from my on-time delivery grading. And in addition, right above it, we've got the ability to set what my on-time delivery range is. So potentially I could say, for me, on-time delivery means up to 3 days early and up to 1 day late. So we provide you all the configuration that you need to be able to say what on-time delivery means for you. And then finally, we allow you to choose what grading scale you actually want us to be performing. So when we're showing that scorecard that we just went over with Coleman, we allow you to set what an A grade means for you, what a B grade means for you, what a C grade means for you, and then finally what a D grade means for you. So where we're able to see that little slider right below there, you're actually able to slide those little nodes around and choose what you want each grade scale to mean. So I could set A as actually 90 to 100 or 98 to 100, B 85 to 95 or whatever it may be. So you're actually having the configuration to be able to go in and play with that. For responsiveness and price variance, we do very similar things. We allow you to set what you want each of those individual grades to mean, as well as be able to choose if you even want to grade your suppliers on these individual metrics. So potentially you could turn off responsiveness if you don't care how often your suppliers are responding to POs, and same thing with price variance. And then lastly, for the overall score, we allow configuration for you to be able to set the weighting of each individual metric towards your overall grade. So as we talked about earlier, that overall score is going to be displayed on the Supplier Hub page. We're able to see if that supplier is getting an A, B, C, whatever it may be. We're actually giving you the ability to say how much you care about OTD as part of this overall grade. So if on-time delivery is all you care about, potentially you could put that as 90% of what you want the overall grade to be comprised of. And then responsiveness and price variance to only be a subset of that. And then lastly, we provide a little disclaimer down here to help walk you through how we calculate that overall grade. And then just before we move on to the next slide, one quick thing I want to cover is just when we click Save Changes at the very top of the screen, which is how we actually go ahead and save individual scorecard changes. There may be a small delay between when you go ahead and save those changes and when those changes are reflected in the individual scorecards. So on the SourceDay side, once any changes to settings are changed, we have to go ahead and recalculate all of those scorecard metrics for your suppliers. So we could see delays for potentially that day until those grades are actually reflected in the scorecard. So if you're seeing any changes that you're making not being reflected in the scorecard, check in the next day. We'll have reconfigured the scorecard for that supplier, and it will include those new settings. Alrighty, let's jump to that next slide. Perfect. So this is all stuff that has been in the application today. What we want to do now is give a quick overview of a few of those phase 2 improvements that we talked about earlier that are going to be coming soon to the application. So these are changes that we're working hard on right now, and we'll be releasing to you soon. I want to give you a quick sneak peek of what those may be. So the first thing that we want to cover is supplier performance dashboards. So one thing that we kept hearing from customer base and also from the customers that were trying out these new features in our beta period was the need to be able to evaluate the performance of their entire supplier base at once. So viewing scorecards is really helpful for understanding how an individual supplier has been performing. But what happens if I want to be able to view how my entire supplier base is performing and choose and understand which suppliers I need to focus on for improvement efforts? What we're going to be releasing is what we're calling that supplier performance dashboard. So it's an overview of all of your supplier base on SourceDay, how they are all performing. So it looks very similar to the scorecard, where we're putting an overall grade, as well as on-time delivery, performance, responsiveness, and price variance. And we're actually able to measure those metrics, not for an individual supplier, but for the entire SourceDay network of suppliers. So with this dashboard, you're able to quickly identify which suppliers need attention and opportunities for improvement. So as you can see, we've got sections where we're able to say, who are my highest ranked suppliers? Who are my lowest ranked suppliers? And we actually dive in for each of those individual metrics. So on-time delivery, responsiveness, and price variance. We're able to rank your suppliers, which is really helpful if your buyer team knows you want to initiate some sort of supplier performance review with your supplier base, but don't know where to begin. So we're going to be able to rank those suppliers, and it'll allow you to be able to say, I want to go focus on this set of 5 suppliers first when I'm going to be starting this initiative. And on the next slide, we show the rest of this all supplier performance page, where we're also going to be including those same sort of contextual analytics, such as how late are those orders and how often are the suppliers changing the date for your entire supplier base. So the goal, again, is to understand how your entire supplier base has been performing and be able to make more strategic data-driven decisions about which suppliers to keep, which suppliers to make improvement efforts with, and which suppliers have been overperforming and potentially want to do more business with. And really quick on this top section here, we're actually able to show how your suppliers are performing against a benchmark. And Coleman can give a quick overview of what that benchmark means.
Sure. So on our individual supplier scorecards, we mentioned that you're able to benchmark against your entire supplier base, an individual supplier against your entire supplier base. Here, you're looking at your entire supplier base. So the benchmark is instead a selection of SourceDay peers that have similar profile in a similar industry that you compare supplier performance along the same measures against.
And that's incredibly helpful if you're trying to, use SourceDay as a tool for competitive advantage to understand, am I actually best in class for my industry? Or do I need to be able to do work within my procurement organization to manage my suppliers better to be able to reach that best in class? And we're going to walk through one other quick feature that is also coming soon, and that is automated supplier onboarding. So another thing that we've been hearing from our customer base is the need to be able to automatically invite suppliers to SourceDay. We often hear that certain customers have a lot of new suppliers that they're bringing on to their business all the time. And therefore, they want these suppliers to be able to receive those PO notifications in collaboration from SourceDay without having to go through the work of actually inviting those suppliers. So what we're going to be releasing is a new feature that is totally optional, and you as a customer can toggle on or off and have full configuration over. And it allows you to be able to automatically bring suppliers onto the platform, so automatically invite them to SourceDay when they have a new purchase order cut to them. So what we would do is anytime that we see a new PO for a supplier that is not on SourceDay, we would allow you to automatically invite them to the SourceDay platform. And just going back to the goals that Coleman shared earlier, we know that when suppliers are receiving notifications from SourceDay and are acknowledging those POs in SourceDay, that they have a much, much, much higher chance of actually having that on-time delivery for that purchase order. So we want to make sure that as many purchase orders as possible are going through the SourceDay platform to your suppliers and being collaborated on. Additionally, we want to reduce the manual effort that is required to be able to invite suppliers to SourceDay. And in doing so, we're going to provide more configuration for your business to be able to say, what are the default settings you want suppliers to be invited with, as well as any customization around welcome messaging and what suppliers see when they're onboarded to the SourceDay platform. And that's via a customized welcome page. And that is going to be it for features that we've released and features that are coming soon. This has all been focused on supplier reliability. And I'm hoping already that y'all are seeing some of these features in use, getting some use out of them, and starting to think about how you can run supplier reliability initiatives in your business. That will open up for any questions.
Thanks, Connor. We do have a question I'd love to have you all discuss a little bit more in depth. Is when we're looking at the supplier performance and we're looking at their scorecards. Coleman talked about that toggle. Are they working on due date or promise date? Some of our suppliers are working exclusively on ship date. And so that toggle is not going to say due date. It's going to say adjusted due date or adjusted promise date. And so I want to just talk a little bit about kind of what those differences are. Like, what are we really grading those ship date suppliers on? We've got that question a couple of times today.
Sure, that's a great question. So on the scorecard itself, when you're doing an individual supplier, that toggle is actually going to pull in the dates that are relevant to that supplier. So if that supplier is collaborating on an adjusted due date workflow on the shipment date itself, that toggle will, instead of saying due date and promise date, it will show exactly what the supplier is collaborating on. In this case, it might be ship date and ship promise date.
And then there are some unique cases, like sometimes we've got a little bit of like, is that really on-time delivery? Is it on-time shipment? All of that. So we are kind of grading those based on what that supplier's using, right? Looks like Connor's audio has decided to stop.
Yes, on-time delivery there is being used as an umbrella term. It's really on time to whatever the target date you specify is, based on if it's a ship date target, based on whether it's shipped by that ship date. If it's a due date for receipt target, whether the receipt occurs before that due date.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much, Coleman.
Yep.
One of the other questions we have is, how do we get the scorecard data? Can we get it out of SourceDay?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I think my audio is going back now, so apologies for that. From the scorecard page, which, as we talked about, is under the Suppliers tab in your navbar, and then from the Suppliers tab, you can reach scorecard by clicking on More Details for a specific supplier, and then clicking over to the scorecard tab. So from that page, you should see at the very top right the ability to export those high-level metrics. And from there, we have two options. We have a PDF option, which just takes an exact image of what you're seeing in your UI. So if you've applied any filters, such as I'm going to choose to grade my suppliers by due date, and I'm looking for just the last 90 days, the PDF export is going to pull that exact same image that you're seeing into a PDF that it'll download right in front of you. For the CSV option, if you choose to open that in Excel, you should be able to see all of those same metrics that are included in Scorecard in that CSV format. So we like to encourage people to work with their suppliers, maybe send that over to their suppliers and allow them to comment, raise any concerns, and just collaborate on what we want those terms to eventually reach. And then at the very bottom of your scorecard page, so if you scroll to the very bottom, you should see another option for more details. And that's actually going to be a separate export that's going to export all the underlying data that we use in order to inform that scorecard. And I'll let Coleman talk a little bit about kind of what's included in that scorecard export.
Sure. So that scorecard export is going to give you all of the line level details that are used to calculate any metric you see in the scorecard. This includes any receipt to go into on-time delivery, any shipment record to go into on-time delivery against a ship date. Any responsiveness metric is going to give you when the response occurred, how many hours it took for that response to occur. So you'll have a line level record for every individual metric that you can then use to go slice and dice, join to other data sets, bring into your own BI tool. Maybe you want to remove some purchase orders that you know were not really a valid representation of that supplier. You can do so and kind of bring your own analysis to the table by pulling in all those underlying records that let you recreate all of the metrics in the scorecard.
Excellent. I know you were working with some clients who were exporting this data and then creating pivot tables and really diving deep into what all of our performance metrics meant and how they were using it. So I know our users are getting really excited about the level of detail we're providing. Excellent. One of the things that I think we can do is all of this information, the details that we're going over today, if you're looking, like we're saying, it's at the top of the screen, it's here and that, all of these details are included in our Help Center. And one of the things that we've been doing lately is adding a lot more Loom videos, or those quick little videos if you're like, I just want you to show me where it is. So we'll kind of take some of the questions that we've gotten and we'll add it to that resource center with videos so you can see exactly how it works. Right. What other questions have you guys been answering as we look at our questions come pouring in now? Yes, we will be sharing this presentation afterward. We'll be sharing this. We'll also be on our Help Center. And if you've registered, you're going to get a link to the recording of this presentation. And if you're watching it later and you have a question, those questions are still going to come to us. So we'll be sure to stay on top of all of your questions.
And Lisa, I'm seeing a lot of questions just regarding the customization of maybe specific metrics or being able to dispute specific metrics with suppliers. And so I do want to reiterate the detailed export that Coleman just went over. So when we take all that underlying data off of SourceDay, we really try to encourage our customers to debate over those specifics with their suppliers in that detailed export. So we'll provide you with the underlying data. If you want to change any of it, maybe remove a specific purchase order or update what you define as price variance to you, you can go ahead and do so using that underlying export.
Excellent, excellent. And then we talked a little bit about how do we set the scorecard settings, right? We kind of we showed a little bit about how we've updated some of those settings so that it's much easier to use. So if you don't have access to those scorecard settings, That is an admin only. So someone on your team likely does. You can always reach out to us and we can help you find the right person on your team who does, and we can give some of you access. We can have the admin and the delegate be able to adjust those settings. So one other question we're getting. All right, another question we're getting. I know you provided a sneak peek of what's to come. Can you give us any other details about when some of those features are coming?
Yep, we definitely can. Yeah, we definitely can. So I think we alluded to in all suppliers page, we were able to view the performance of not just a specific supplier, but all those suppliers in general. So we're looking at releasing that around January timeframe. So hopefully right after the new year, y'all will be able to see kind of an all performance dashboard view. And hopefully we can use that for those Q1 performance reviews with your suppliers. There is also a feature I think it's worth talking about, which is the ability for your suppliers to be able to have the exact same view. And that feature is also going to be going out very early January as well. So we'll be able to have the same type of view, but minus maybe some of the insights such as how we compare against the industry. We're removing that from the supplier side and just giving them the ability to have the exact same view as the buyer, to have that full collaboration and say we both have visibility into how the relationship is going.
Excellent. And I know some of our clients who are doing that are finding that supplier-facing scorecard is leading to some really rich conversations about supplier performance and what maybe the supplier needs from the buyer, what the buyer needs from the supplier. So that is some of our clients have been hesitant to share that, and we're finding that it is just leading to a very fruitful and rich conversation and enhancing overall performance. Excellent. Any other questions that you would like us to address? I know some of you may have asked a specific question about your specific workflows. We're going to have our support teams follow up with you individually. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I think we're going to wrap up. We'll stay on the line for a few minutes to answer any other questions that might come in. If, like I said, we did not answer your question individually today, we are going to follow up with you to have a conversation. We probably had some follow-up questions for you, so our teams are going to be reaching out to you. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, this is going to be available online in our Help Center, and you'll also receive a follow-up email. All right, thanks, everyone.